but all good.
All right. So, welcome everyone to another Prentice interview. For those of you that have come from the community, thank you for joining. But if you are Bootcamp grad and you're not in our community, you can join at the link at the bottom. And if you just like tech, subscribe to our channel because we will be talking to a ton of great people like Brian coming on over the next few months. But today, we're going to focus on Brian Schermerhorn. Hope I said that last name right. And he's currently a software engineer at Facebook. But we're kind of also interested in the bootcamp side since he went to Hack Reactor and was one of the, I guess you can call him a pioneer in the bootcamp world. So we'll hop in and kind of go through his story to figure out how he got to where he is now and what he can kind of share with everyone else trying to go through the journey now. So let's get into it and let's start from like the beginning, Brian. So talking about like your initial, like childhood. Or were you into tech then, or was this something that came on later in life?
Yeah. I think a lot of people usually, whenever people are introducing themselves, I feel like commonly you'll hear people say like, I've been into computers since I was 7. And honestly, I don't like how it's a common thing that people do that in the sense that I feel like it unnecessarily discourages people who might become interested in it. I was generally interested in computers when I was younger. I remember looking at jobs and thinking, okay, well, some jobs suck less than others, and some jobs get paid more than others. And I was interested in using computers. I played a lot of StarCraft, and it was kind of fun to tinker with computers. Like I think I built my own little tower thingy when I was in middle school or high school, and it's not that hard. You just like plug the RAM into the motherboard and screw it into the box.
You
and I tried to say again.
Are you buying parts off of Newegg?
Yeah, stuff like that. You were kind of cutting out there for a second. Yeah, I think I bought stuff on Newegg, or I went to Fry's Electronics, or I don't remember it. I don't think Amazon was around back then. And I tried. I was interested in becoming like a computer tech more than working at Subway or something, and I thought it would be more interesting. I never actually did that. Sorry, and I think I was trying to get jobs in that, but I just couldn't for whatever reason. And then I think I like built a website for someone using Dreamweaver. It was absolutely terrible. I was not very great at it. I actually diverted away from tech type jobs when I was around 19 to 21. I didn't think I would be going into something like that. I just didn't know anyone in tech. Like, I knew a couple people sporadically, but they did different things like server admins or something. And I was just like, what is it like to be a programmer? Yeah, it's like, what do they do? And they would talk about like, oh, I admin this. And I was like, how do you learn that? They're like, oh, just experience. And it just felt kind of daunting of like, how do I get into it? And I probably could have taken more initiative to like, hey, can I come shadow you? I'm sure they would have said yes, but I never did think of that. And I actually was more interested in like kind of international business and languages. I became interested in like learning foreign languages. And I speak Portuguese fluently. I was self-studying Spanish. I was learning. Say again.
It's similar JavaScript.
Yeah, the similarity is they're both languages, generally speaking. And I had a friend named Jason who he's like, hey, what's up? And I was like, oh, I'm just like self-studying Mandarin. And then I'm glad he dropped this comment. I've done it for a while, so he felt comfortable saying stuff like this with me. But he said, why don't you learn a language that'll actually make you money?
Aha.
And I was like, but Mandarin's really hard. Like, surely an American dude who speaks Mandarin is a valuable thing. But then it kind of got me to think more about my direction. And the idea of programming seemed so intimidating to get into, but I started to slowly get into it more. I was like kind of using Codecademy. I was using YouTube back then. The resources available were much crappier.
What year was this?
Like, it wasn't as organized as it is now with like Udemy course. What?
What year was this? Like that you're doing all this like learning?
Like 6 or 7 years ago, I think, something like that.
Okay, so not too long ago, but so there was still like some infrastructure. I remember using like Khan Academy in those times, but like now there's a lot more, obviously.
Yeah, but like the topics they would go over were so basic that you didn't know how to like build an app or like it was like the baby Lego pieces. And my opinion of resources back then were that they were either way too introductory or they were way too difficult to kind of just be taken through a course. Like, it was either like here, we're going over for loops and a class and objects, but like maybe I just didn't ever find the courses, but I just found it really difficult. So I was like, maybe I need to go to college. Maybe I'll learn there, because that's college is tried and true, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I thought. And then I took I was in my second or third computer science class, and I was just like thinking, when am I going to learn how to like build stuff that people use? Like, it just felt like I was fiddling around with like, create this terminal program. And that same friend who had asked the question about learn a language that'll make you money, he had brought up Bootcamps kind of on the side. And I didn't think about it. It kind of seemed really risky. They seemed like just really expensive at the time as well. Like, I was, that's way too much money for me. And I think eventually later I was in like some calculus classes. I was in like other various classes, and I'm thinking like, and I started to look into boot camps more specific, like Hack Reactor. I think it was called General Assembly, App Academy, some of those places in California.
Those are big now.
And I was like looking at their student projects, and I'm like, that's the stuff I want to learn how to build.
The real stuff.
Why aren't we learning that now? And I'm like looking at my time, and I'm like, I'm spending all this time learning all of these general classes as well. And I'm like, what if I spent all my time actually learning things that's actually building stuff that looks relevant? So the pull came really strong to like not value school as much and look more towards a code camp of some sort. And I'm a pretty skeptical person when it comes to people making promises of being able to do things. And so I was very skeptical of code camps. I think people should be skeptical of most code camps, actually. Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of research into these code camps because, I mean, they're just a lot of money to me and a lot of money to most people, right? Like, Hack Reactor was 18,000 or 18,500 back then. And I'm like,
there's no ISAs, right? Like that didn't exist. It was like all upfront money back then, right?
Yeah, there was no income sharing agreements to my recollection. And I'm like thinking, okay, so I'm looking into them, and I'm like looking at Yelp reviews. I'm looking at just like, I'm talking to their coordinators and saying, the best student projects you have, like what's the best? And I'm kind of using that as a maximum range for what I could possibly learn how to do. So I started filtering out the ones where the projects weren't very impressive, and Hack Reactor seemed to have the best ones, along with like the best reviews on average, and they just seemed to. And I like that they had like a bar that you had to pass. Like it just seemed like it would be better, and they were in the news, I think, and hard to get into.
Oops.
Right, and I'm thinking like Yelp reviews can be faked. Like
Yeah.
what? Let's. I saw the student projects, which I really liked. So I started asking questions on Quora, like anonymously. And the thing that I became skeptical about was what's the average salary that you can come out with from one of these? Because they were advertising like 100 or 110,000, and they were also advertising like students were on average able to, like 96% of them were able to get a software engineer job within 3 months or something, or 6 months. I don't remember what they advertised back then.
Interesting.
But it just seemed unbelievable to me, because the most I was doing for money, most of the jobs until that point were like $9-10 an hour jobs. Like I worked at call centers, I worked at Verizon, I tried door-to-door sales during the summer.
College jobs.
Yeah, like that was the best I could possibly get, and that was the best I was seeing a lot of classmates who graduated getting. I would leave a job. I would leave a job if it paid like $1 or $2 more, because that's like, it was a huge relative raise percentage wise, right?
Yeah.
And I was just really scrappy, and so to see those numbers is like amazing. It's like it's like unbelievable that anyone could make that much, right? With that success rate. So I basically I started. So I asked them on there. I was like, "Is this 96%? Is this like median average, or like what kind of people are we including in it? Are we including people who get any kind of job or internship jobs? Like, are these legit software engineer jobs?" It was really hard for me to believe, because one software engineer who I respected, who had worked at Microsoft at some point, he had said like, "Oh, it's essential. You have to go to college. Like, it's essential."
Yeah.
And so I was kind of balancing that with like, are these people getting real jobs, or just how it just, everything was like against what seemed like it was possible, that you could go to a camp like this and come out with a job.
Yeah. You're like,
And
who is even hiring these people? Because also like now there's more startups and stuff. So like, there's like a lot of kind of engineering jobs, but even like, you said like 6-7 years ago, it's kind of like, oh, the big companies, are they hiring the engineers? Especially like when you're coming into tech from like outside of tech, it's like, Microsoft, Apple, Google. So you're like, if they're not hiring without a college degree, like who is? Like where are these people getting hired from Hack Reactor? I
just didn't know it. I mean, that was probably even deeper level than I was thinking. I just didn't know anyone or anything about it.
Yeah.
That all I'm hearing is you need a college degree. From everyone I'm talking to, you need a college degree. And so it was kind of unbelievable to think. And then I slowly started to like believe, like, okay, this seems legit, even against my senses. Like, all that evidence seems to line up that Hack Reactor at least is a legit path. And so I'm like, I'm living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath basement with my wife and our new baby son, and to save rent, we're splitting it with my brother, so he's in one of the rooms, right? Because we're barely making like any money. Like, she works as like a receptionist at a hotel thing. I'm like doing some joker job, really.
What city is this in? What city were you in at that time?
I was living in Provo, Utah.
Utah, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm like in 30,000 student debt. I drive a car that has like none of the doors locked, and it pulls to the left, and it leaks oil constantly. You know,
I had one of those too.
Yeah, so that was our situation, and we're living in a basement, and I'm just like, I'm looking at this debt, and I'm like, how do we get out of this? Like, I can't even think of a job that I'm qualified for, or that I even just see, like when I look at job sites that pay enough to where I can even just start it, that is like a career. Mm-hmm. I tried sales for a while. I forgot to mention this. I tried sales for a period of time that I just was not very great at sales.
What type of sales?
So like I worked at Verizon, so that was kind of retail. I tried door-to-door sales a few times. And yeah, I just wasn't great at it. So I'm just like, to me, I have like no clear path to success. And so when I started seeing Hack Reactor and I started like investigating it more, I became more and more excited because it felt like I've always wanted to learn to code. It was always sort of this mystical thing of like, you know, of magic. And it seemed to be a really high paying job. And Hack Reactor seemed like a viable path that just took a lot of hard work and was hard to get into, and I'd have to somehow find 18 grand to pay for, and I'm talking to my wife and I'm like, hon, and I'm like, look at all the reviews. Here's the research I've done. Like, this seems like a path. And she's like, oh, I don't know. It's a lot of money. And I'm like, yeah, but you know, look at this, like the percentages of success. And she's like, yeah, but it's in San Francisco. And I'm like, we can make this work. Like, let's figure this out. How do I, like, let's figure it out. So I'm like thinking, I have a gym membership my dad bought me as a promo that ended up only being $50. I was kind of grandfathered into that. I will go live out of my car in San Francisco and just like use the water in the showers there and live in San Francisco. Like, I'm like, wow. I will do anything to just make this work, you know, because it's like almost, I saw it as like this golden path out of debt and out of my situation.
You're fully bought in, yeah.
And I also saw it as like the type of work that I wanted to do that I didn't feel like I was really learning in college as well. So I was in the middle of a semester, and I just dropped not a very smart idea, but I kind of wanted to like so I bailed in the middle of the semester, dropped all my or the date where you can get like a W or whatever it is for it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even get accepted yet. I'm like, I'm gonna prepare now. I'm gonna figure out how to get in. Oh wait, actually, let me step back. So I'm like looking at how do I just physically get there? And my wife's like, you're not gonna leave me and a baby here. It's too scary, right?
Yeah, that's like drastic.
And I'm like thinking, let's figure this out. Like, we cannot just have problems. We need to like figure out a way to make this work. Like, can you live with my parents or your parents or somebody? Like, this isn't a permanent solution. It's like let's just make it work. And I was thinking through like, how do we do this? And then I saw they had a remote data program. Like, one day, I think it was a new button on their top of their page, and I'm like, remote beta, what's this? I became skeptical that the remote beta program. I thought, oh, online school, this is going to suck.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've taken online classes before, or they're usually a joke, right, at colleges. So I did a lot of digging into that, and you know, got rid of the skepticism. After I took their test, their interview process, and I don't want to remote. I wanted to do on-site. It was easier than the on-site. And they said, yeah, you can switch to the on-site. And then I was like, okay, well, never mind then. Like, it was just a thought. I don't actually want to do it. I still want to do remote. You can see I'm a very skeptical person when it comes to like these big promises of things.
Yeah, you have to. Especially like when like that was kind of like the early days. You know, there's not a lot of hey, like people go to boot camp to get jobs. It's like what like how is this real? There's so many questions, especially when you got to make that upfront commitment. Like that's what's craziest to me is paying that much. Like it went back in like the Wild West times when it's when like 20,000 is almost like community college level almost like for a couple of years. But yeah, it's a big decision. So I see why you have to kind of convince your wife to get to it.
Well, and myself. I mean, I also had to do the proper research to like figure out what's the best possible one because I'm only going to get one shot at this, right? Like I need to pick the best one possible because like I was already in debt and we ended up like I ended up thankfully finding out that I could defer at Hack Reactor. I could defer half of it till 6 months later.
Okay.
So I ended up having like about $9,500 I needed to come up with. So I'm like, where do I get money? So I went to a bank. They didn't want to loan me money. I went to all the banks I had credit cards with, not credit cards, like my checking account with. I had a credit card, and I thought that I was building up credit because, you know, your parents tell you got to get a credit card early and build up credit.
Exactly.
Well, turns out there's a concept called deep and shallow credit, and I didn't have deep enough credit. And I'm like, well, won't this help me build up deep credit? They're like, oh, you have to have deep credit already. And I'm like, what? What is the...
Yeah, the whole credit system is its own, like, mess of stuff. It's like, you have to be, like, at least, like, 28 to have enough credit history for a lot of things. It's crazy.
Yeah. So the banks were a no-go. The interest rate, I think I could have, my dad was offering to sign on something with me, but the interest rate was so crazy. And I immediately would have needed to start paying it back, whereas I wouldn't have enough money to pay it back until like after 6 months later. So I was looking for better options. My brother had recently gotten a job and he had been working and kind of saving. He's 6 years younger than me. And I was like, hey man, like, can I borrow $2,000? I'll pay it back within a year. I'll pay you 10% interest. Luckily he loaned me the money. I got in the mail an American Express card that had 0% interest for a year. So I think like a $4,000 limit or 3 or 2, I don't remember, but I maxed it out
right away.
And I don't remember where the rest of the money I came up with. Maybe that was enough. But I also had to find money to live for the 3 months that I would be in the program. Like I had to borrow that money too on top. It wasn't just the tuition. So I kind of went all in. Like I was kind of stacking the deck with debts and loans, and I was like, I'm going all in on this sucker. Because I don't have anything else I can do, like conceivably path to take.
Yeah.
You know, and it seems like a bet. I've done my research, and then that's when I burned the boats and I just quit school in the middle of the semester, and I started preparing. I hadn't even been accepted to the program yet, but I was like, I'm gonna get accepted, like whatever it takes.
That's the way to do it.
So, fortunately. Which after I got into the program, I learned that like most of the people in my group about 3 tries to get in. And so I was like, oh
wow,
cool, okay. And yeah, so let's see, it was 6 days a week, and yeah, and I would frequently study way past that. Like, you know, they would have a project that you would do during the day. At the end of the day, after I went through their curriculum, I would redo the project to make sure that I solidified the material. So I was frequently up till 12 at night to redo stuff. To have a distraction-free environment. My friend had this office that he was using that was that doubled as a food storage location. So he was letting me kind of go work there during the day. So basically, me in a food storage room with an internet connection and a pack of Diet Mountain Dew would be just working incessantly like the entire day and more during this program, like ensuring that I made it work. And yeah, that's kind of the gist. I've been talking a long time, but that's kind of the gist of.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. Like because for you, it's kind of like it sounds like a founder starting a startup. It's like you burn the boats, you have to make this commitment, do all this research, and then like you kind of went in and like you said, you're working in like a food storage container, like just trying to get it done. Like that sounds like a founder story, and you were in San Francisco, so.
Well, hold on. So because it was a remote program.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
That was what let my wife jump on board, so that we didn't have to go like live out of my car in San Francisco. I was willing to do it, like for sure.
Yeah.
But luckily, I was able to get her sign off on it because it became a remote program. So.
Okay.
Yeah, and our apartment got flooded actually twice during the program. We had to go live at my grandparents' house. It got flooded for 2 months.
It's like adding
that was a pain. Yeah, it wasn't great. Luckily, I had some family nearby that we could kind of move in with temporarily. And I was even during the program, we were skeptical that like we were actually going to get jobs out of this. Like we were like, there was one point where Sean, he's one of the co-founders of program. Congratulations! We're looking at each other through the Google Hangout chat, and he's like, "What? Why don't you guys believe me?" And we're like, "What do you mean? Why don't we believe you? Why don't you like prove to us how what you're saying makes sense?" Like none of us feel like we're engineers, you know, like. Even throughout that, like I was actually learning what I needed to get a job, because your perception of like what you need in order to have one of these really high paying jobs that seemed like astronomical amounts of money to me was like, you just have to know so much. And there was a point where we were like at week 8 or 9 where we spent a few days like working on our resumes. It was funny because we worked on our resumes, we like co-proofed each other's stuff, and we like kind of had some, I think we had you kind of like would do mock interviews with each other.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, now you have your resumes, but don't submit them anywhere. And like I had never been.
Oof. 1 second.
I didn't do. I'm an Eagle Scout. Is that going to help me? Which it never did. In the job market. And I was so impressed with my resume because like basically we threw off everything that had anything to do with non-coding stuff. And it had my projects, and I was so impressed. I was just like, oh my gosh, I love how this looks. So just to test the waters, I was like, I'm going to apply to a couple places. And I just want to see what happens. You know, I'm just curious. And I actually got, out of 3 applications, I got 2 interviews. One of them was from the company that's now called Podium in Utah.
Okay.
They were called some other company name at the time. They were doing something completely different, and they were like above a bicycle store. They were doing Angular, and they wanted me to like come in for 4 hours and do some shadow work with them. And that couldn't work because I was still in the program, and I was like, I can't do that. But they seemed impressed with me, though. They were like, oh, it seems like you learned Angular really well. Seems like they're teaching good stuff at Hack Reactor. So I took a lot of confidence from that, and they had me do some like little take-home project, and they seemed to really like it. So I was like, wow, like I also built their mock project like really quickly. And so I took a lot of confidence from like, wow, I can like do stuff out in the real world that people are impressed with. Like, it was a great moment of sort of confidence booster for me. And that it was actually such a good project that it actually became like one of my better projects that I put on my resume. Mm-hmm. I took that take-home project and I put it on like Heroku or something, and I had an API that it was tapping into, and then like I actually put it on my project. And it was actually one of the projects that I used to show the subsequent interview that I had.
Yeah. And
they were like really impressed with me, this second place. And he actually wanted to give me an offer like on the spot. My experience was with Angular. My interest lied within data visualization. And that's all they teach it. And they wanted to redo everything with like Node, Mongo, Angular front end. And the project was going to focus a lot around like data visualization stuff. And none of them knew JavaScript. They were all like just these like MySQL, PHP, Linux, old school dudes, you know?
Yeah,
and
old boys.
I was like the perfect fit for their situation. Like it just like everything lined up for what they needed. So the guy was like, let's try to go offer before you leave the office. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Like, I didn't finish this program. And that was an even bigger confidence booster, where I'm just like, holy, they want to give me a job offer. Like, what? And eventually I ended up taking the job offer. So I had a job offer 2 weeks before the program actually ended.
Wow.
And I think I got chewed out by the job director guy. He was kind of mad that I had done that.
Why? That's their number one goal, is to get hires like as quick as possible. That way they can go back and market, get more students.
I know. I kind of reverse chewed him out on it, where I was like, I said basically that same thing, and he eventually apologized, and he was actually very helpful in informing my counter offer of an email to them.
Okay.
And he helped me to get an offer that me and my wife had like not dreamed we would get, and so he was helpful even with that. Honestly, I don't blame them for that. It did distract me from my final project. Like, my mind was just not on my final project, which we were building a data visualization component library with Angular was my final project.
Got you.
But my heart was just like not as in it, because in my motivation for doing well in the projects. But you're right. Ultimately, I got the purpose of why I went to the code camp.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so with that, like, other than, they were kind of mad at you a little bit for that, was there anything like in the boot camp that you wish that they would have done, or overall, like, were you happy with the Hack Reactor program and everything like that?
That the program was not very great from the aspect of like the content of the curriculum. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe my expectations were like really high or something. So I felt like we would be learning I don't know. I just sort of had an idea for what we would be learning. And I felt like the content that we were given usually was like, here's minimal explanation. Now go just build this, go Google stuff. Like, it wasn't, I kind of expected like a more a more like helpful curriculum that kind of walked you through things a little bit more. So from one aspect, the content of their curriculum was not very magical. It was actually somewhat minimal. But the value that I think that the Hack Reactor program provided is a couple of things. One, it was pretty much always pair programming. Like you always had a partner going through material, and we would rotate through our cohort who we were partnered with. I thought that was really valuable to have someone there because you could kind of help, you could kind of self-debug things, and sometimes your partner wouldn't understand something, so you could kind of learn by explaining it to them, like reinforced learning. Or if you needed help, they could explain it to you, which was good for them, and you were able to get help more quickly and build like a relationship. And the other thing that I think they did well is because they had that bar for being able to get in. To give you an idea of the bar, in my interview, I had to build .map and .reduce from scratch. Okay. And I barely knew JavaScript, dude. Like, I barely knew it. And I had to build these utility functions from scratch.
This is to get in, right?
That I'm thinking, don't you just like use a for loop for this kind of stuff? But what they ended up explaining later was that they wanted to test people on their ability to take a new concept and be able to use it. So it was supposed to be a new concept. So, and there was also a bunch of other like pre-work that you had to complete as well. So it was comforting to know that everyone you were with was at like this minimum bar, and they all had like a real drive and for pushing, so and we kind of fed off that. The other thing I really like is that, and this part is not unique to Hack Reactor, but we had there was like a help button desk. So whenever you guys were actually stuck, there would be like, you'd press the help button and then someone would hop into your chat. People that are like legit self-studying, that's one of the hardest parts. Is there are sometimes parts where you get stuck and you just need someone to come in and help. Like you don't know what to Google. You don't know the right words to use. You don't even know what is happening that's wrong, right? You're just stuck. So that is one of the...
That's a big skill. Is like so I also work at Thinkful as a data science mentor, and I try to tell them some of the problems. I'm like, you have to learn how to Google. I'm like, even 10 years down the line, like you have to know how to find the answer you want, because like if you go especially into more complex subjects, like it's gonna get crazy, and like finding the answer is the hardest part of being a self-taught person.
Yeah, so they would do their best, the help desk, to ask you questions to figure it out yourself. They'd say like, okay, what have you tried to do? Have you tried Googling this? Like they would really try to get you to do it on your own. But even past all that, like it was just comforting to know that they were there. They could help unblock you. And then the other thing I think that I liked about it is that we had team projects. So like I said, the material they had wasn't great, but I thought they had a good structure where a lot of the people I talk to who go through boot camps now, they do very minimal number of group projects. Whereas in the real life, like that's all that exists are group projects a lot of the time, right? In the real world.
Yes.
And so we would have, for the last half of the through frameworks and library general concepts and patterns, and then the last half was like just all group projects, mostly from scratch. So you had to learn how to like coordinate with other team members. You had to learn how to like fit your piece into theirs, right? You had to learn how to just communicate and get that technical terminology out to your teammates in a way that they understand, which is kind of a skill, right? And then the projects that you put on your resume end up better than a solo project because you have more people working on it, right?
Yeah.
So when it goes to demo, it looks cooler. You obviously only claim the credit for the portion that you did, but it does help like sort of have a nicer project to display to people. And you can talk about working in a team.
So in the community, like, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we've been talking about like the group aspect because I see a lack of like collaboration skills a lot among like bootcamp grads. It's they not only not just working with other developers, but also not working with designers and product managers. So it's like the full product development lifecycle.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Also, when you have a group project, the ambition of the project can be greater. And then the types of problems that you come across can be greater, which then help you when you go to interview and talk about the problem of like, tell me the hardest bug you came across, right? If you work on a solo and there's less moving pieces, right? So it's less of a chance you'll actually come across a really challenging bug. And you won't be able to talk to having had managed conflict with a partner. So the depth and richness of your ability to even have proved yourself or learn it's harder to do without group projects. So I don't know why some of the boot camps I see that are pretty popular don't seem to have many group projects. I'm not going to call any of them out, but like that's an important thing that I think you need to have.
Not for sure. Okay, so it sounds like Hack Reactor, it was a mix, but it was definitely early. I know they've improved since then. But so then you get out, you get your first job, crazy offer that you didn't expect. So tell me about like that time, like how was like the first job, like going into it? Were you confident enough to do everything, or was it like a long learning curve?
Yeah. And when I say crazy offer, I only mean relative to me and my wife's expectations.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, my whole life, I've been at most making around $10 an hour.
Yeah.
Right. So doing any job that doesn't it would almost be worth it to just not have a job that feels soul sucking, like doing telemarketing or something. It's almost an equal paying job, but one that's enjoyable. Right. Or to have one. That's to just be prevalent. And that would be fantastic if we could get that. Like that would blow our expectations away. So we got a fantastic offer relative to that bar. Also, I did a really good job at like negotiating and sticking to my guns of not giving a number first and all that. As far as like the experience, it was good. I think I had a lot of. I thought it was funny. I was working at a company that like they were trying to push for getting a product out launched within like 3 months, but it like we just kept not hitting it. And I thought it was interesting that like, I'm like, is this how teams are run? Like they just don't hit their marks. And I'm like thinking, can't we like set a goal that we can achieve?
Yeah.
So I think after a year, we actually were able to launch the version of the project that we wanted. And, I built the data visualization part of it that I wanted to build, other parts. And I did a little bit of the Node backend. And I hit like the year mark, and I think the company let go all of their marketing staff. And I was worried that I would get let go too. At the 6-month mark.
Damn.
Big performance that I negotiated with in the original part, but I was just like worried that because I was the youngest or newest, that I would be the most expendable. So building new stuff, and we were just like kind of lazily fixing bugs. it didn't feel like we had as strong of a direction. So I started looking around at other offers at that point.
Okay.
And yeah.
So just to kind of speed through. So going through a little bit, one question we have in like the audience is, like, regarding the job search and interviewing, like right now, like what kind of issues and trends are in the field that you think they should be aware of?
What sort of issues and trends in the field should they be aware of? Is that it?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have not interviewed for 2 years, so I'm not explicitly sure from that angle.
Yeah, it's not too far removed.
I think I don't know if I can answer from like a current trend standpoint, but from a general standpoint of advice that I give to people who are trying to break into getting a job is that I think that the bar has been raised somewhat
Mm-hmm.
as are impressive amongst the sea of applicants, right? And I think that people are not skeptical enough of the promises of the boot camp that they promise, like, come here and get a job after 6 or 9 months or 3 months or whatever it is. And it's like a lot of people I talk to just sort of have this mindset, like, okay, I'm going through the program, I'm going to get a job, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
Whereas with me, I was like, I need to make this work. Like, I need to go above and beyond. Whatever everyone else is doing, I need to go above and beyond. Like, I have to get a job. And like, I went all in for it. And yeah, I feel like I think I wrote a blog article on this, actually, of like, stop applying to a million jobs if you're not getting interviews.
Oh, I saw that was a recent one, right?
Yeah, somewhat recent.
Yeah,
and I kind of go over like, some of the things that you need to have on, your resume. So I think that one kind of speaks to my best advice that I know of to take advantage of, or to put your best foot forward.
Okay. So then going to like the Facebook side, like what would you do to kind of get noticed for that? And, it's a great company. So is it just kind of like experience and consistency, or did you apply your kind of a focus on one company to get in?
So I was working at a company called Jolt in Utah, and I think I was I was there for like a year. So my total like front end engineer experience was 2.5 years or 3, something like that.
Yeah.
And I actually have no idea what I did to get noticed. A recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he basically said, like, hey, Brian, I noticed your profile on LinkedIn. I'm a recruiter for Facebook for the front-end engineering program. Is applying at Facebook something you'd be interested? And I was like, is this a prank? Like, I had messaged recruiters at Google before on LinkedIn, and I never got any response. So I had kind of written it off as just like, this is not for me, like in my mind. And then here I was at some point getting reached out to by a recruiter on LinkedIn. And at first I'm like, is this a joke? Like, is this like some scam of some sort? And I actually asked him that question. I said, so why did you reach out to me? And his answer was like, well, you have about the number of years of relevant experience that we're interested for in this position. And I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And Yeah, he just like encouraged me to apply. Like I basically was like, dude, I don't know, man. This is Facebook. I don't know if I could get in. He's like, no, well, let's do a pre-screen. Tell you what. I think he said, I was like, let's. He's like, I think you'll do better than you realize. Like, just give. I told him, like, okay, cool. So, just for the screening interview, I think I wanted like a month to prepare, which was actually quite excessive for the recruiter screening call. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know. I just wanted to prepare. Like, I kind of saw it as like a one-shot thing again, and then I had told him like, hey man, I'm gonna need like 6 months to prepare for this interview.
Oh my god!
And I didn't know how much I needed. Like, yeah. It was like one of these tech companies where I had heard that the interviewing process was like ridiculous,
Yeah.
So
very tough on algorithms and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's like how I got connected.
Okay. So then so going back, like just like looking at your career path, like was there something else you would have done differently in terms of getting into tech or just navigating companies and positions?
Yeah, so a couple things. I think that for tech, I think it's really important that you don't have to start out loving it. Like that's kind of what I don't like about these stories of encouraging new people to join is it's like, I knew I was going to be in tech since I was 7 or something. It's like, yeah. It's like, well, good for you, but that you don't need to have been born in it. Like, I think it's important that you eventually develop a passion for it. Like you eventually develop this sort of interest intrinsically for what you're able to do, like to build something from nothing. Like you need to get a certain level of excitement out of that to push past the minimum requirements of being a hireable engineer. You can't just be in it for like, I want to get a good job. I'm just going to do this boot camp and I'll get it. Like you need to get a certain level of excitement out of it. And it's okay if you don't have it immediately. It's okay if you develop it after the point where you start building it and it feels like it's real, but you eventually need to have it. The other, as far as like the job switching, I think I left from that first job too quickly. I think that I was rather skeptical of managers and stuff, so I opted to leave rather than have a frank conversation. I underestimated the importance of like building up experience at a single company and building up a larger scope of problems to tackle. I think I should have. He gave me no reason to distrust him.
Yeah.
So if I could go back, I would say, hey, I'm starting to feel kind of bored with just fixing bugs. Like, is there something of bigger scope I could take on? Or maybe I wouldn't have said I'm bored, but I don't know. Maybe I would have just said that, hey, I'm interested in tackling a bigger problem. Is there something I could do? Like, I would have done something to communicate, like, hey, can I do more? What can I do? Instead of just kind of bailing on them.
Sometimes it's like intimidating.
But I was kind of afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was afraid. Like, I was really happy that I was at a job that was like this, so I didn't want to screw it up. And I was afraid to voice this discontent with the job. I kind of was scared that it's like, you're unhappy? Well, goodbye then, sort of a thing. And I don't think that actually would have been the case. I think I could have stayed there longer and tackled a bigger scoped problem, which is somewhat of an underestimated ability in tech. A lot of people will kind of job hop every 1 year or something, or maybe 1.5 years or 2. And if you're not like learning to tackle larger scoped problems, then you're not growing as much as you think. You're just kind of going and doing the same work, the same difficulty of work, whereas you need to like tackle larger scoped problems.
Yeah.
And the only way that you can do that, usually is you need to like stay at a company long enough to build up a domain knowledge of what they're doing and like all of that before you can do that well. So when people are always bouncing between jobs, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot of like the opportunity to tackle larger scoped things, which has a new set of skills that you need to develop in order to do that. So I think I bailed from that job too early, and I should have stayed longer, and I should have communicated what I wanted to my manager.
It's also different times now. So like LinkedIn, you know, a lot of people see, I know I learned a lot about like management from LinkedIn also, and people also have seen, okay, people are getting held accountable, but you can talk to managers, and then if the manager can't talk to you, then you might not want to work in the company. So I feel like now it's easier to have those kind of conversations, say, hey, I want to take on more. But even 5 years ago, it was like much different.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think a lot of it was on me. I just had like a large skepticism of like, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think a lot of it was on me. I could have definitely have done more. Maybe it was different times, but I didn't even say anything. And he didn't even do anything that deserved distrust. I was just scared, and I thought it was easier to just switch companies. And I didn't know what I didn't know, which was that tackling a larger scope of problem was beneficial. I just thought that it would stay at that difficulty always or something. So, yeah.
That makes sense. So one thing I want to touch on before we get wrapped up is LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you know, you've built a pretty sizable following. So like when did you start trying to like focus on that, and like what made you want to focus on that?
Is 7,900 sizable? I don't know.
For LinkedIn, I think that's sizable. I think anything above like 1,500, especially when it's like meaningful connections and not just, you know, those people that have 10,000 but like 2 likes on a post. So like you're getting a legitimate, you know, engagement because you actually post stuff that's useful for people. So that's why I think your following is legit.
Dude, I can't stand when people on LinkedIn post like, "Thanks everybody for helping me reach 5,000 followers." Yeah. I've reached. I'm like, dude, it's just it's not an accomplishment. You just like you could get that by having a bot go visit people's profiles and just like click connect or something, you know?
Yeah, like I
don't know. Anyway, that's a small tangent for me.
Yeah, for like when hiring, like I've like looked at profiles and, you know, they have 10,000. I'm like, okay, like let me see like their post, and like they shared like one random post like 2 months ago and got a like. I'm like, you know, just having followers for followers' sake is just like it's useless.
It's almost like you're just trying to build up like an email list of people that you can market to, rather than like I have people that value what I have to say.
Exactly.
So that like, and like I said, you could build that up through a script or a bot or something anyway. So it's not even like you had to really work for it. Most people will accept connections on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So it's anyway. Sorry. So your question was about LinkedIn.
Yeah. Like,
say it again.
How'd you get into it? Like what kind of popped up that made you say, "Hey, this is important right now"?
So it's one of the things that I talk about in the blog article of stop applying for a million jobs if you're not getting interviews. Is I talk about the importance of like there's sort of this like weird effect that exists where if you're any sort of a public figure, you get a higher than deserved credibility for being like you get a higher level than you kind of deserve. And so it's like an easy way to, if you just have a presence and you're communicating valuable content of some sort, like maybe not exceptionally valuable, but at least valuable, it helps establish your presence, and it's easier to get like interviews and stuff. So from one aspect, I I thought that it would be valuable to build up some kind of a presence. The other one, I just wanted to. I have random ideas sometimes about things. Like I'm at work, and then some concept like comes into my head of some way to, some mindset to have or some way to do something, and I just thought, why don't I put this on out there? Like maybe someone will think it's valuable. Helps me. And then I put it out there. Some people seem to like it. I kind of wonder like how valuable it is. Sometimes I feel like, I think I made a post recently where I said, I wish people would want to connect with me or that they would engage with my content more because they thought it was clever and funny rather than because I work at Facebook. I think I get more credit than I deserve just because of that. But I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah. Well, regardless, like, you definitely have to work hard to get that many people. And I know the content you put out on your blog. So what's your blog link, just so people can know?
ihascode.com. IHAS code.com.
All right. Yeah, I'll throw in the description after so people can check it out. But yeah, to put out that kind of content, like personal branding is huge nowadays. And I know they do talk about it in bootcamp programs mostly. So that's good. But yeah, so we're actually...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I guess one thing I wanted to say was, growing up, my last name, Schermerhorn, like I got made fun of so much in school for having a weird name. And when you're growing up in school, all you want to do is be the same as everybody else, right? Like the average person, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not the person got a bunch of faces or something, but I was an average kid. I didn't want to get teased for having a name like Schermerhorn. I mean, I have many permutations that people came up with to make fun of me with. But now that Google exists and people type in a name, it's a lot better to have a unique name just for that.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than John Smith or something. So now I thank my parents for having had crazy last names to help with that, the personal branding thing.
Yeah, no, it's great. So we're a little bit over time, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on, Brian. Definitely enjoyed learning about the early days of, Hack Reactor and boot camps, and then kind of how you wiggled your way into getting noticed even for a Facebook interview. So that's awesome to hear. Any kind of parting thoughts that you just want to tell bootcamp grads or anybody, trying to break into tech?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to you need to eventually have a passion for it. It's okay if you don't have it right away, but you need to eventually have it at some point. Mm-hmm. If it starts to feel like you're slogging through it and is okay, do I know enough to have a job yet? It's probably just not a good fit.
Yeah.
Is your portfolio good enough to get a job? I've talked to some people where their portfolio of what they have after coming from a code camp was just not impressive, and they would defend to me that they did have an impressive portfolio. They're like, no, I do know enough, and I'm like, okay, why did you ask me for advice with this?
Yeah.
And I think being somewhat skeptical of code camps in the sense that they are a business, they make money when your butt is in their seat, and you need to first find out what do I need to know to get a job, and does this code camp actually help me? There was a point where me and a friend wanted to start a code camp, and we wanted it to be remote. We wanted it to be high caliber and hard to get into, and we kind of would crap on the other local boot camps that were nearby because they would literally just let in anybody. Mm-hmm. And we started to kind of which sets a low expectation. Like if you can get let in really easily, it sets a low expectation for the student that like, oh, I know enough. When really they probably need to do a bunch of pre-work.
Yeah.
And I like so the instructors for some of these code camps would message me and say, hey, you can't do this. This is destructive to the community. I'm like, no, you guys are not properly communicating to boot camps that like the bar needs to be higher for these people, because you only get 3 months. You got to really make the most of it. You can't be busy in the code camp learning the basics. Like you have to have already learned some of the before you go in. And they're like, well, you don't understand. The business model doesn't work that way. Like we need to have more people or else we can't stay afloat. And I'm like, well, then your business model sucks.
Yeah.
So keep in mind that keep in mind that like boot camps make money by having you in their seat. Not actually, maybe that's different with the income sharing agreements, because that was back when they weren't as prevalent. So maybe that's not as true.
Now the bootcamps don't get paid till you get a job. So that now their main focus is not even butts in the seat, but getting you hired as quickly as possible.
I did forget about that. So interests are more aligned. And I would say, I mean, be ready for a grind. Like it's not easy to get to know enough, especially in this time of COVID. I'm not actually sure how much harder it is to get a job right now during COVID versus pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. The other thing is just, I think, to just not like, if you're willing to take advice of what you need to know, and you're willing to hear the news of like, hey, your portfolio is just not up to par, your interviewing skills are just not up to par. If you need to just be willing to keep going, push through, learn what you need to know, and just trust that like it will work out eventually. I know a bunch of people that like were not that far away from getting what they needed to know, but they quit beforehand, partly because they didn't have that passion part that I was talking about.
Yeah.
So and then following like the other stuff, trying to build a presence, trying to do something to set yourself a little bit apart, maybe doing a little bit of open source, although that was never really. And then just keep going.
Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, I got disconnected for a little bit, but so yeah, you guys got it. You got the knowledge from Brian. So yeah, if you guys want to connect with Brian, you can find him on LinkedIn. His name, like you mentioned, it's definitely a long one, but it's obviously in the title, so you can find him quickly. And then also his blog, which I will link in the description, so you'll be able to check that out as well. ihascode.com. So again, thank you, Brian, for joining me tonight and sharing your story. Hope to see more of your posts on LinkedIn, and I promise to engage with them.
Cool. All right, thanks, Rod. Take care, man.
Thank you. Have a good night.